this process, this learn to read process, it brings forth a kind of confusion that's unique and different from the other kinds of confusions they encounter in their, spoken language interactions with people. It's different than their physical somatic interactions with the
Well, it's
world.
a very different sort of task, and I think one of the things that we are the beneficiaries at this point in time of an enormous amount of research into the act of reading and the acquisition of reading skills. And one of the things I think that's become a fairly established conclusion is that reading is not a terribly natural process. This is not like the acquisition of language, that we don't witness the same level of discomfort in preschool children around their language skills for the most part, because language, particularly conversational language, develops for the most part in the vast majority of children fairly naturally. We don't have to go around exerting a tremendous amount of energy to teach kids how to communicate with us and with each other. And so they do that. And now, of course, there are always exceptions. Kids with speech difficulties and whatnot might have some very real issues around that. But for the most part, we don't see that. Reading is not as natural a process as it was once thought to be.
Hold you right there. You say as natural. What about it is natural? I mean, you said it's not terribly natural. It's not as natural, but my sense is it's radically unnatural. I don't know how.
Well, you could look at it.
I
I think that's probably fair, given that human beings were around for a fairly substantial period of time before the development of print, and that in itself tells us the fact that it's not just something that comes with part of the biological package.
Right, and the unique code processing challenges of the English language is only 500 years old.
That's right. Yeah.
And only 10 generations, 20 generations have been doing it. So
yes, it is. I mean, it's interesting. I probably, I'd say actually in contrast, it's interesting that we ever did assume that it was a natural process and that basically all we needed to do is provide structure and guidance and exposure to print and reading would happen. Well, we know, in fact, that reading doesn't happen for a pretty substantial number of kids. Now, for whatever reason, there are a substantial number of kids that, seemingly regardless of what approach is taken, how careful we are, how careless we are, they learn to read. So put them in a room with books, a little bit of instruction and guidance, and they're fine. But on the other hand, we also have a very substantive number of children that experience, mild to moderate difficulties in ways that impact their emotional development, their school performance. And it would seem that based on what we know now, that when these deficits begin and are entrenched early on, they're very difficult to undo. The longitudinal studies that we have regarding the evolution of reading development suggest that if you're substantially impaired in first grade, you're very, very likely to be substantially impaired in fourth grade. And if that's the case in fourth grade, you're probably looking at a school history of academic failure to one degree or another. So it's a fairly depressing, picture, when looked at in that light.
Doesn't necessarily tell us much about what's necessarily so in the development of an individual child, but rather the probabilities of the entire pattern of home, school, and world that contribute to making it very difficult for a child that has that difficulty to escape that trajectory.
Exactly. Right. No, it doesn't really illuminate the specific parameters that really contribute to that picture.
Because we another tack, we kind of know that we can help 95% or more of all the children that are struggling.
Absolutely.
If we met them with what they needed.
Right. That's the encouraging thing, that at this point in time, we know a great deal more, for instance, about how to identify kids who are likely to be at risk. So we know what the early markers of reading failure are. We know how to track those systematically, which gives us really critical information so that we can adjust instruction for kids as they proceed through school and not document their failure at the end of the year. So but we have access now to very good continuous performance measures that give us the kind of information we need if we're going to adapt instruction for children and make it responsive to their individual needs rather than just offering them a package of instruction and essentially saying, good luck. We'll check at the end of the year to see if you're doing okay.
When we say individual needs, there's a distinction or a big difference between being in some kind of contact with the individual child and having some prolonged assessment of actually meeting them, actually connecting with them, in being in sync with them as they struggle from the inside out in this challenge, and what we're calling individual needs as it fits over our statistical models of the aggregate population, right? I mean, so what we're talking about is still statistical approximations of individual needs for the most part.
Absolutely, yeah.